This is a reading from the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, Chapter 8, on close friendship with Jesus. When Jesus is with us, all is well, and nothing seems hard. But when Jesus is absent, everything is difficult. When Jesus does not speak to the heart, all other comfort is unavailing. But if Jesus speaks but a single word, we are greatly comforted. Did not Mary Magdalene rise at once from the place where she wept, when Martha said, "The Master is come, and is asking for you"? John chapter 11, verse 28. Oh, happy the hour when Jesus calls us from tears to joy of spirit. How arid and hard of heart you are without Jesus. How foolish and empty if you desire anything but Jesus. Surely this is a greater injury to you than the loss of the whole world. What can the world offer you without Jesus? To be without Jesus is hell most grievous. To be with Jesus is to know the sweetness of heaven. If Jesus is with you, no enemy can harm you. Whoever finds Jesus finds a rich treasure, and a good above every good. He who loses Jesus loses much indeed, and more than the whole world. Poorest of all men is he who lives without Jesus, and richest of all is he who stands in favor with Jesus. It is a great art to know how to hold converse with Jesus, and to know how to keep Jesus is wisdom indeed. Be humble, and a man of peace, and Jesus will abide with you. But if you turn aside to worldly things, you will soon cause Jesus to leave you, and you will lose his grace. And if you drive him away and lose him, with whom may you take refuge, and whom will you seek for your friend? Without a friend you cannot live happily, and if Jesus is not your best friend, you will be exceedingly sad and lonely. So it is foolish to trust or delight in any other. It is better to have the whole world as your enemy than offend Jesus. Therefore, of all dear friends, let Jesus be loved first and above all. Love all men for Jesus' sake, but Jesus for himself. Jesus Christ alone is to be loved with an especial love, for he alone is the best and most faithful of friends. In him, and for his sake, love both friends and foe, and pray to him for all of them, that all may know and love him. Do not wish to become the object of special praise or love, for this belongs to God alone, who has none like himself. Do not desire that the heart of anyone be given wholly to yourself, and do not yield yourself wholly to the love of anyone. Rather, let Jesus abide in you, and in every good person. Be pure and free of heart, untrammeled by any created thing. Offer to God a pure and spotless heart, if you wish to be at liberty, and see how gracious the Lord is. Unless his grace draw and guide you, you will never attain this. But once you have cast aside and forsaken all else, you may be united to him alone. When the grace of God comes to a man, he is strong in all things, but when it departs, he is left poor and weak, and feels abandoned to punishment and sorrow. When this happens to you, do not despair or be discouraged, but accept God's will calmly, bearing all that befalls you for the glory of Christ. For after winter comes summer, night turns to day, and after a storm comes fair weather. Psalm 57, chapter 29, or verse 29. Matthew chapter 8, verse 26. Chapter 9, on the lack of all comfort. It is not difficult to forego human comfort when we enjoy that of God, but it is a great thing to be able to forego all consolation, human or divine, and for God's sake willingly to endure desolation of heart, neither seeking oneself in anything, nor regarding one's own merit. Is it any proof of virtue that you are filled with joy and devotion when God sends his grace? Surely everyone longs for this, for he rides at ease who is borne up by the grace of God. Is it any wonder that he feels no weariness when he is carried by the Almighty and led by the greatest of all leaders? Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 30. We are always glad of comfort, and only with difficulty is a man stripped of self-love. The holy martyr Lawrence, with his priest, overcame the world, because he despised all that seemed delightful in the world. For the love of Christ he patiently allowed God's high priest Sixtus, whom he dearly loved, to be taken from him. Thus, by love of the Creator, he conquered his love for man, and preferred the will of God to all the comforts of men. So also must you learn to give up even your close and beloved friend for the love of God. And do not grieve when a friend deserts you, for we must all be parted from one another at last. A man has to undergo a long and fierce inner struggle before he learns fully to master himself and to direct his whole love towards God. When a man relies on himself, he often comes to rely on human consolations. But the true lover of Christ and the eager seeker after holiness does not fall back on these things, nor does he look for pleasurable sensations, but prefers to endure great trials and arduous toil for Christ. When God bestows spiritual comfort, receive it with a grateful heart, but remember that it comes it comes of God's free gift, and not of your own merit. Do not be proud, nor over joyful, nor foolishly presumptuous. Rather, be the more humble for this gift, more cautious, and more prudent in all your doings. For this hour will pass, and temptation will follow it. When comfort is withdrawn, do not immediately despair, but humbly and patiently await the will of heaven, for God is able to restore to you a consolation even richer than before. This is nothing new or strange to those who know the ways of God, for the great saints and prophets of old often experienced these changes. When grace was with him, David once exclaimed, "In my prosperity I shall never be removed." Footnote 1, Psalm 30, verse 6. But when grace was withdrawn, he tells what he experienced in himself, adding, "You turned your face away from me, and I was troubled." Yet he does not despair in his trouble, but prays to the Lord more earnestly, saying, "To you, O Lord, will I cry, and will make my supplication to my God." At length he received the answer to his prayer, and bears witness that he was heard, saying, "The Lord has heard and taken pity on me. The Lord has become my helper." But in what way? "You have turned my mourning into joy," he said, "and have surrounded me with gladness." If this is the experience of great saints, it is not for us, poor and frail as we are, to despair if we are sometimes fervent and sometimes cold of heart. The Holy Spirit comes and goes according to his good pleasure. Therefore, holy Job says, "Visit him early in the morning, and suddenly you chasten him." Job chapter 7, verse 18. In what then can I place my hope or trust, save in the great mercy of God alone, and in the hope of his heavenly grace? Psalm 51, verse 10. For whether I enjoy the company of good men, or devout brethren, or faithful friends, whether holy books, beautiful treatises, or sweet singing and hymns, all these are of little help or comfort when I am forsaken by grace, and left to my own poverty. At such a time there is no better remedy than patience and submission to the will of God. I have never found anyone, however religious and devout, who did not sometimes experience withdrawal of grace, or feel a lessening of devotion, and no saint has ever lived, however highly rapt and enlightened, who did not suffer temptation sooner or later. For he is not worthy of high contemplation who has not suffered some trials for God's sake. Indeed, the temptation that precedes is often a sign of comfort to follow, for heavenly comfort is promised to those who have been tried and tempted. To him who overcomes, says God, I will give to eat of the tree of life. Revelations chapter 2, verse 7. Divine comfort is granted that a man may be the stronger to endure adversity, and temptation follows, lest he become proud of his virtue. The devil never sleeps, nor is the flesh yet dead. Never cease, therefore, to prepare yourself for battle against the unresting enemies who lie in wait for you on all sides. Chapter 10. On gratitude for God's grace. Why do you look for rest, since you are born to work? Dispose yourself to patience rather than comfort, and to the carrying of the cross rather than pleasure. What man of the world would not gladly receive spiritual comfort and joy, if he were sure of retaining it? For spiritual comfort surpasses all worldly delights and bodily pleasures. All worldly pleasures are either vain or unseemly. Spiritual joys alone are pleasant and honorable, for they spring from virtue and are infused by God into the pure heart. But no man may enjoy these heavenly consolations at will, for temptations are seldom absent for long. False liberty of mind and overweening self-confidence are a great hindrance to heavenly visitations. God is generous in granting us the grace of comfort, but man does ill in not returning all to God with gratitude. This is why his gifts of grace cannot flow freely in us, because we are ungrateful to the giver, and do not return them to their fount and source. God will always give grace to those who are grateful, but what he grants to the humble is withheld from the proud. I desire no consolation that would deprive me of contrition, nor do I aspire to any contemplation that might lead me to pride. For not all that is high is holy, nor all that is pleasant good, nor every desire pure, nor is all that is dear to us pleasing to God. I gladly accept that grace which makes me ever more humble, more reverent, and more ready to renounce self. For whoever is taught by the gift of grace and chastened by its withdrawal will not presume to attribute any good to himself, but will acknowledge himself poor and devoid of virtue. Render to God whatever is God's, Matthew chapter 22, verse 21, and attribute to yourself whatever is yours. That is, give thanks to God for his grace, and confess that the guilt and penalty of sin are yours alone. Set yourself always in the lowest place, Luke chapter 14, verse 10, and you shall be awarded the highest, for the highest cannot stand without the lowest. The saint stands highest in God's eyes, who are lowest in their own. And the more glorious they are, the more humble is their spirit. Filled with truth and heavenly glory, they have no desire for vainglory. Grounded and established in God, they cannot be proud. They ascribe all goodness to God. They seek no glory from one another, but the glory which comes from God alone. John chapter 5, verse 44. They desire above all things, and strive always, that God be praised in themselves and in all his saints. Be thankful for the smallest blessing, and you will deserve to receive greater. Value the least gifts no less than the greatest, and simple graces as special favors. If you remember the dignity of the giver, no gift will seem small or mean, for nothing can be valueless that is given by the Most High God. Even if he awards punishment and pain, accept them gladly, for whatever he allows to befall us is always for our salvation. Let whoever desires to retain the grace of God be thankful for the grace given him, and be patient when it is withdrawn. Let him pray for its return, and let him be prudent and humble, lest he lose it once more.